Properties of seawater. Objectives. The chemical composition of seawater is an essential topic in oceanography. After attending this module, the user would be able to know about the properties of seawater, their variations and distribution in the oceans. The role of seawater in controlling the marine ecosystems and life are also highlighted in this module. Introduction. All water existing at or near the surface of the earth belongs to the hydrosphere. It includes atmospheric water vapor, groundwater, lakes, rivers, polar ice caps, and the oceans. The waters of the oceans and seas cover more than 70% of the Earth's surface. The water that is most often found in nature is the seawater. It is about 98% existing on the globe as seas and oceans. The rest is distributed as ice, water vapor, and fresh water on land. Oceanic waters play a very important role in controlling the global weather and climate, interactions between atmosphere and the hydrosphere, and maintaining water balance of the globe. Oceans also provide enormous living and non-living resources for many life forms to survive. Seawater has a very unique chemistry, physics, and biology. Seawater is one of the most fascinating and plentiful substances on the planet. The basic properties of seawater and their distribution, the interchange of properties between sea and atmosphere or land, the transmission of energy within the sea, and the geochemical laws which are governing the composition of seawater and marine sediments are the fundamental aspects studied in the subject of oceanography. Key roles of the oceans. The key roles of the oceans are: they absorb and reflect sunlight, they store the heat, they transport the stored heat, they cause major changes in the climate system, they are the main source of atmospheric water vapor, they exchange gases, example carbon dioxide, with the atmosphere. Seawater in hydrosphere. To know the role of seawater in the Earth's hydrosphere, the following aspects are to be understood first. Physical properties of seawater, chemical composition of seawater, biological conditions of seawater, temperature distribution in oceans, salinity and density of oceans. Seas and oceans are very huge bodies of saline waters. Their distribution and dynamics are very influential in several ways. Understanding the properties of seawater is inevitable in oceanographic studies. Physical properties of seawater. The waters of the seas and oceans has formed over millions of years. Most people do not realize the complex nature of seawater. In fact, seawater cannot be duplicated in any lab anywhere in the world. Seawater has its own physical, chemical, and biological properties. Due to its huge volume and thickness, it has certain unique characteristics in the distribution of temperature, pressure, and density. Most of these properties vary horizontally and vertically. Physical properties also act as limiting factors in marine ecosystems. An efficient solvent. Water in general is a good solvent. Seawater is an effective solvent. Seawater is also at the receiving end to dissolve all the sediments derived from land. Rivers carry much of the dissolved organic and inorganic substances towards the sea. These loads increase the salts of the oceans every year. It has many conservative and non-conservative properties. High heat capacity. Seawater has several unique properties like high heat capacity, latent heat of fusion, LHF, latent heat of vaporization, latent heat of melting, thermal expansion, density, viscosity, and turbidity. High LHF. Water has the capacity to store heat, conduct heat, and release heat. The heat capacity of seawater is the highest of all solids and liquids except liquid ammonia. The heat transfer in oceanic currents is large. The latent heat of fusion, LHF, is also the highest in seawater except ammonia. Hence, it acts as a thermostat at freezing point owing to uptake or release of latent heat. Latent heat of evaporation. The latent heat of evaporation is yet another property which is also the highest in seawater than other substances. It is important in heat and water transfers to the atmosphere. Thermal expansion is another important property of seawater. The temperature of maximum density decreases with increasing salinity. For pure water, it is at 4 degrees centigrade. High surface tension. Seawater is characterized by its surface tension. It is the highest among all liquids. Seawater is colorless in small volumes. Due to the presence of organic life and sediment loads near the coasts, it may look greenish-blue or turbid in some places. Blue is the longest wavelength of the colors of the spectrum. Since it is the last one to be absorbed by the ocean, it is the most dominant color reflected. When descending into the sea, the colors of the spectrum begin to be filtered out. The first color to disappear is red. Transmitting sound waves. In addition to these, seawater also transmits sound. The speed of sound traveling in seawater is also a special feature. It is about 1,500 meters per second, and some low frequencies travel for long distances also. Hence, it is possible to analyze the depth of the seas and oceans using sound waves. Chemical composition of seawater. Seawater is a complex mixture of water, salts, and many other organic and inorganic substances. Seawater contains more dissolved ions than all other types of water like river water, rainwater, lake water, and groundwater. It contains 96.5% water, 2.5% salts, and smaller amounts of other substances, including dissolved inorganic and organic materials, particulates, and a few atmospheric gases. The chemical composition and ratios of the minerals and naturally occurring elements are too complex to accurately replicate. The chemical constituents of seawater include major ions and minor trace elements. In addition, seawater contains the suspended solids, organic substances, and dissolved gases. Elemental composition. Seawater chemistry shows 96% water and only 4% other elemental composition. Oxygen alone is 85.84%. Hydrogen is 10.82%. Chloride is 1.94%. Sodium is 1.08%. Magnesium is 0.12%. Sulfur is 0.09%. Calcium is 0.04%. Potassium is 0.04%. Bromine is 0.0067%. Carbon is 0.0028%. 6 abundant ions. Because of these, seawater is dominated by 6 most abundant ions like chloride, Cl-, sodium, Na+, sulfate, SO2-4-, magnesium, Mg2+, calcium, Ca2+, and potassium, K+. By weight, these ions make up to about 99% of all sea salts. Overall chemistry. When we analyze seawater, the major ion composition of seawater will be invariably showing the following composition in milligrams per liter. Chloride, Cl-, 18,980 milligrams per liter. Sodium, Na+, 10,556 milligrams per liter. Sulfate, SO2 minus 2,649 milligrams per liter. Magnesium, Mg2 plus 1,262 milligrams per liter. Calcium, Ca2 plus 400 milligrams per liter. Potassium, K plus 380 milligrams per liter. Bicarbonate, HCO3 minus 140 milligrams per liter. Strontium, Sr2 plus 13 milligrams per liter. Bromide, Br minus 65 milligrams per liter. Borate, BO3 3 minus 26 milligrams per liter. Fluoride, F minus 1 milligram per liter. Silicate, SiO3 2 minus 1 milligram per liter. Iodine, I minus less than 1 milligram per liter. Total dissolved solids, TDS of seawater is 34,483 milligrams per liter. It is also expressed in parts per million, ppm. Minor elements, with reference to the other elements, bromine 67.3 milligrams per liter. Inorganic carbon is 28 milligrams per liter. Nitrogen 15.5 milligrams per liter. Fluoride is 13 milligrams per liter. Strontium 8.1 milligram per liter. Boron 4.45 milligrams per liter. Silicon 2.9 milligrams per liter. Iodine 0.064 milligrams per liter. Rubidium 0.12 milligrams per liter. Barium 0.021 milligrams per liter, and uranium is 0.0033 milligram per liter in seawater. Sea salt. Sea salt is produced by evaporating seawater, but this is not a straightforward method. Between 100% and 50%, first the calcium carbonate, CaCO3 equals limestone, gets precipitated, and it is followed by the crystallization of gypsum between 50% and 20% water. Between 20% and 1%, sea salt precipitates NaCl, sodium chloride, but going further, the bitter potassium and magnesium chlorides and sulfates precipitates. The amount of these salts in a volume of seawater varies because of the addition or removal of water locally, example, through precipitation and evaporation. The salt content in seawater is indicated by salinity S, which is defined as the amount of salt in grams dissolved in 1 kilogram of seawater and expressed in parts per thousand, or ppt. Main salts. Main salts and elements present in oceans are in parts per trillion. Sodium chloride, NaCl, halite, 23.48, about 2.35%. Magnesium chloride, MgCl2, 4.98, about 0.50%. Sodium sulfate, Na2SO4, 3.92. Calcium chloride, CaCl2, 1.10. Potassium chloride, KCl, 0.66. Sodium bicarbonate, NaHCO3, 0.192. Potassium bromide, KBr, 0.096. Hydrogen borate, H3BO3, 0.026. Residence time. Salinities in the open ocean have been observed to range from about 34 to 37 parts per thousand. It is denoted as 3.5%. All major ions of seawater are conservative. Though their salt contents vary from one place to the other, their ratios do not change. All dissolved materials have residence times varying from hours to millions of years. Nitrate has the lowest residence time and sodium has the highest residence time in seawater. Major contributors. Weathering of rocks and minerals and salts introduced into the streams feed into the oceans as contributors. The total quantity of this is on the order of 2.5 billion tons per year. The minerals and salts are also derived from volcanic eruptions, known as outgassing from Earth's interior. We know that this is true because certain elements like chlorine, bromine, sulfur, and boron are more abundant in oceans than in the Earth's crust. The hard parts of marine organisms also contribute some salts to accumulate, that is, shell material. Of the many minor dissolved chemical constituents, inorganic phosphorus and inorganic nitrogen are among the most notable, since they are important for the growth of organisms that inhabit the oceans and seas. At the ocean-atmosphere interface, gases are added to seawater by diffusion and wave action. Hence, seawater contains various dissolved atmospheric gases, chiefly nitrogen, oxygen, argon, and carbon dioxide. Gas composition at the ocean surface is in equilibrium with atmosphere. Gas composition changes with time and depth in the oceans. As salinity increases, the amount of gas dissolved decreases because more water molecules are immobilized by the salt ion. Gases like oxygen and carbon dioxide are influenced by the sea life. Solubility of gases in seawater. Plants reduce the concentration of carbon dioxide in the presence of sunlight, whereas animals do the opposite in wither light or darkness. The solubility of gases in seawater is controlled by the temperature, salinity, and pressure. All gases are less soluble as temperature increases. When water is warmed, most of the gas bubbles leave the liquid. As water temperature increases, the increased mobility of gas molecules makes them escape from the water, thereby reducing the amount of gas involved. This is shown in the following table. 1 kilogram of fresh water contains 55.6 molecular water. Nitrogen and argon are the inert gases which do not take part in the processes of life. Hence, they are not affected by plant and animal life. But non-conservative gases like oxygen and carbon dioxide are influenced by sea life. Plants reduce the concentration of carbon dioxide in the presence of sunlight, whereas animals do the opposite in either light or darkness. In the above table, the conservative gases, nitrogen and argon, do not contribute to life processes, even though nitrogen gas can be converted by some bacteria into fertilizing nitrogen compounds, such as nitric oxide NO3 and ammonium NH4. Some other components of seawater are the dissolved organic substances such as carbohydrates and amino acids and organic rich particulates. These materials originate primarily in the upper 100 meters or 300 feet of the ocean, where dissolved inorganic carbon is photosynthetically transformed into organic matter. pH of seawater. pH is another important property of seawater. It is reflected in the form of acidity and alkalinity. This distribution of ocean acidity shows that ocean pH varies from about 7.90 to 8.20. The seawater pH is the lowest in most productive regions where upwelling occur. It is also thought that the average acidity of the oceans decreased from 8.25 to 8.14 since the advent of fossil fuel in the world, according to scientific observations. Biological conditions of seawater. Biological oceanographers study all forms of life in the oceans, from microscopic plants and animals to fish and whales. In addition, biological oceanographers examine all forms of oceanic processes that involve living organisms. These include processes that occur at molecular scales, such as photosynthesis, respiration, and cycling of essential nutrients, to large-scale processes such as effects of ocean currents on marine productivity. Primary productivity. Many biological properties and processes control the abundances and distributions of life in oceans. In oceans, the sun's energy is transformed into organic matter and is also used by living organisms. The abundances of various constituents affect the life and abundances as well. Marine organisms exchange matter and energy with each other and with the waters around them. Photosynthesis, chemosynthesis, primary productivity, and nutrient cycling are the major processes helpful in marine life survival and maintain the ecology of oceans. The availability of light controls the plant growth and phytoplankton distributions in the ocean. Dissolved organic matter. Seawater is dominated by much amount of dissolved organic matter. Dissolved organic matter remains in the ocean for very long periods of time, maybe many thousands of years. It is roughly equal to the abundance of living matter on Earth. There are many sources of organic matter. Decomposition of dead plant and animal is one source. Secretion of organic compounds by living plants is also another source. Forms of organic matter. The relative abundance of various forms of organic matter in seawater are: dissolved organic matter 95%, particulate organic matter 5%, phytoplankton 0.1%, zooplankton 0.01%, fishes 0.0001%. Dissolved organic matter enters food webs primarily through tiny bacteria. Particles dispersed in seawater. Particles dispersed in seawater also influence the chemical and biological behavior of seawater. The total amount of particles in the oceans is about 10,000 million tons. Biological particles are relatively large, ranging from 1 micrometer to 1 millimeter. These constitute up to 70% of the particulate matter in the ocean. Particles are also destroyed either mechanically or chemically. These dissolved particles release nutrients, silica, and metals. Hence, the chemistry and biology of seawater is fully influenced. Deposition of sediments are also controlled by these masses. Oxygen dissolved in seawater. Oxygen dissolved in seawater participates in both biological and chemical processes of oceans. It comes from the atmosphere. When nutrient concentrations are high, dissolved oxygen concentrations are low. The oxygen dissolves by diffusion from the surrounding air. Aeration of water that has tumbled over falls and rapids, and as a waste product of photosynthesis. Dissolved oxygen. Fish and aquatic animals cannot split oxygen from water, H2O, or other oxygen-containing compounds. How much dissolved oxygen an aquatic organism needs depends upon its species, its physical state, water temperature, pollutants present, and more. Numerous scientific studies suggest that 4 to 5 parts per million ppm of dissolved oxygen is the minimum amount that will support a large, diverse fish population. The dissolved oxygen level in good fishing waters generally averages about 9.0 parts per million, ppm. Adequate dissolved oxygen is necessary for good water quality. Oxygen is a necessary element to all forms of life. Total dissolved gas concentrations in water should not exceed 110%. Concentrations above this level can be harmful to aquatic life. Fish in waters containing excessive dissolved gases may suffer from gas bubble disease. When an organism dies and decomposes, most of its organic molecules end up in solution as dissolved organic carbon or DOC, molecules that are very much smaller than the smallest of organisms, which are viruses. Carbon reservoirs. Oceans are considered to be the carbon reservoirs. It is evident based on the following statistics. Carbon dioxide dissolved in oceans, 87.5%. Dissolved organic carbon, DOC, in oceans, 7.1%. Biosphere, all living organisms, 4.0%. Atmospheric carbon dioxide, 1.4%. Temperature distribution in oceans. Ocean is the major recipient of the sun's radiant energy. It has the capacity to store heat. Many physical processes depend on temperature of waters. In oceanographic studies, platinum resistance thermometers are used to measure the temperature of waters. The distribution of temperature in the surface of the oceans follows a zonation pattern. It is independent of longitude. The warmest water is near the equator and the coldest water is near the polar regions. Heat fluxes, evaporation, rain, river water inflow, freezing and melting of ice caps all influence the distribution of temperatures in the oceans. Changes in temperature and salinity can increase or decrease the density of ocean waters at the surface, which can lead to convection. The temperature of the world's ocean is highly variable over the surface of the ocean, ranging from less than 0 degrees centigrade near the poles to more than 29 degrees centigrade in the tropics. The maximum surface temperature, of course, depends on many factors like latitude and season. It is heated from the surface downward by sunlight, but at depth most of the ocean is very cold. 75% of the water in the ocean falls within the temperature range of -1 to +6 degrees centigrade, and the salinity range of 34 to 35. Extreme temperature. Under the enormous pressures of the deep ocean, seawater can reach very high temperatures without boiling. A water temperature of 400 degrees centigrade has been measured at one hydrothermal vent. The average temperature of all ocean water is about 3.5 degrees centigrade. The variations in total salinity and in temperature cause variations in the density of seawater also. Several biotic and abiotic factors can cause the salinity to deviate from the common value of 35. The inflow of river water and rainwater decreases the salinity. Excess evaporation or formation of pack ice causes the salinity to increase. Thermal layers. 3 general layers are present, except in polar regions where only 1 or 2 layers are present because of coldness. Shallow surface mixed zone, 2%. This is the warmest zone made from solar energy, mixed by waves around 500 meters in thickness and the most saline zone. Transition zone, 18%. This zone includes thermocline, which is the point of great drop-off in temperature existing below 3000 meters, and halocline, which is the point of salinity drop-off, which is roughly corresponding to the thermocline. Deep zone, 80%, located just above or below freezing point. This is not a saline zone. Salinity and density of oceans. Ionic concentration is the amount by weight of salt present in water. and can be expressed in parts per million, ppm. The classification of water based on total salt content is fresh water, less than 1000 parts per million. Slightly saline water from 1000 ppm to 3000 ppm. Moderately saline water from 3000 ppm to 10,000 ppm. Highly saline water from 10,000 ppm to 35,000 ppm. Ocean water has a salinity that is approximately 35,000 ppm. Salinity is the saltiness. Salinity is the saltiness or dissolved salt content of a body of water. It is a general term used to describe the levels of different salts such as sodium chloride, magnesium and calcium sulfates and bicarbonates. Salinity in the ocean refers to the water's saltiness. In oceanography, it has been traditional to express salinity not as percent but as parts per thousand, which is approximately grams of salt per kilogram of solution. Practical salinity scale. In 1978, oceanographers redefined salinity with a new property known as Practical Salinity Scale, PSS. It is the conductivity ratio of a seawater sample to a standard potassium chloride solution. As PSS is a ratio, it has no units. It is not the case that a salinity of 35 exactly equals 35 grams of salt per liter of a salt solution. Some scientists estimate that the oceans contain as much as 50 quadrillion tons of dissolved solids. If the salt in the ocean could be removed and spread evenly over the Earth's land surface, it would form a layer more than 166 meters thick, about the height of a 40-story office building. Salinity affects marine organisms because the process of osmosis transports water towards a higher concentration through cell walls. A fish with a cellular salinity of 1.8% will swell in fresh water and dehydrate in salt water. So, saltwater fishes drink water copiously while excreting excess salts through their gills. The main nutrients for plant growth are nitrogen, N as in nitrate NO3 minus, nitrite NO2 minus, ammonia NH4 plus, phosphorus P as phosphate PO4 3 minus, and potassium K followed by sulfur S, magnesium Mg, and calcium Ca. Iron Fe is an essential component of enzymes and is copiously available in soil but not in seawater, 0.0034 ppm. This makes iron an essential nutrient for plankton growth. Plankton organisms like diatoms that make shells of silicon compounds furthermore need dissolved silicon salts, SiO2, which at 3 ppm can be rather limiting. Zones of salinity. Based on the salinity, the oceanic water masses are classified into various zones. Thalassic series, greater than 300 hyperhaline, 60 to 80 metahaline, 40 mixoeuhaline, 30 polyhaline, 18 mesohaline, 5 oligohaline. Types of seas. Marine waters are those of the ocean, another term for which is euhaline seas. The salinity of euhaline seas is 30 to 35. Brackish seas or waters have salinity in the range of 0.5 to 29 and metahaline seas from 36 to 40. These waters are all regarded as thalassic because their salinity is derived from the ocean and defined as homohaline, if salinity does not vary much over time, essentially constant. Salinity is an ecological factor. The ocean salinity at the surface is high and then salinity decreases until a depth of about 1000 meters. Salinity then increases again slightly with increasing depth. The halocline is a layer of water where the salinity changes rapidly with depth. Salinity is an ecological factor of considerable importance, influencing the types of organisms that live in a body of water. As well, salinity influences the kinds of plants that will grow either in a water body or on land fed by a water or by a groundwater. A plant adapted to saline conditions is called a halophyte. Organisms, mostly bacteria, that can live in very salty conditions are classified as extremophiles, halophiles specifically. An organism that can withstand a wide range of salinities is euryhaline. Water circulation. The degree of salinity in oceans is a driver of the world's ocean circulation, where density changes due to both salinity changes and temperature changes at the surface of the ocean produce changes in buoyancy, which cause the sinking and rising of water masses. Changes in salinity. Changes in the salinity of the oceans are thought to contribute to global changes in carbon dioxide, as more saline waters are less soluble to carbon dioxide. Salinity affects ocean organisms because the process of osmosis transports water towards a higher concentration through cell walls. Fish with a cellular salinity of 1.8% will swell in fresh water and dehydrate in salt water. Saltwater fish drink water copiously while excreting excess salt through their gills. Freshwater fish do the opposite by not drinking but excreting copious amounts of urine while losing little of their body salts. Marine plant life, seaweeds, and many lower organisms have no mechanism to control osmosis, which makes them very sensitive to the salinity of the water in which they live. This world map shows how the salinity of the oceans changes slightly from around 32 ppt, 3.2%, to 40 ppt, 4%. Low salinity is found in cold seas, particularly during the summer season when ice melts. High salinity. High salinity is found in the ocean deserts in a band coinciding with the continental deserts. Lowest salinity is found in the upper reaches of the Baltic Sea, 0.5%. The Dead Sea is 24% saline, containing mainly magnesium chloride, MgCl2. Shallow coastal areas are 2.6 to 3.0% saline and estuaries 0 to 3%. The density of a water sample is a measure of the total mass in a given unit volume. The density of fresh water is 1 gram per milliliter or kilogram per liter, but added salts can increase this. The saltier the water, the higher the density. When water warms, it expands and becomes less dense. Density. The colder the water, the denser it becomes. So, it is possible that warm, salty water remains on top of cold, less salty water. The density of 35 ppt saline seawater at 15 degrees centigrade is about 1.0255 or sigma equal to 25.5. Another word for density is specific gravity. The deep ocean is layered with the densest water on bottom and the lightest water on top. Circulation in the depths of the ocean is horizontal. That is, water moves along the layers with the same density. The density of ocean water is rarely measured directly. Salinity increases the density because the dissolved salts are contained in the same volume as the water. Cold seawater is denser than warm seawater. There are several areas at the ocean surface where the surface water becomes very cold. Density differences among different water masses allow physical oceanographers to calculate the movements of water in the oceans. Water molecules cluster more closely around positive and negative ions in solution in a process called electrostriction, which also serves to increase seawater density. Density of water in the ocean, reported as sigma T, is calculated from temperature, salinity and pressure by using the equation of state for seawater. Sigma T equals sigma minus 1 into 1000. Properties of seawater. At 4 degrees centigrade and with a salinity of 35, the density sigma of seawater is 1.02781 gram per cubic centimeter. At depth, pressure from the overlying ocean water becomes very high. Pressure at 4,000 meters is about 400 atmospheres, but water is only slightly compressible, so that there is only a minor pressure effect on density. At a depth of 4,000 meters, water decreases in volume only by 1.8%. Although the high pressure at depth has only a slight effect on the water, it has a much greater effect on easily compressible materials. Interdependent properties. The relationship between temperature, salinity, and density is shown by the blue isopycnol of same density curves in this diagram. In red, green, and blue, the waters of the major oceans of the planet is shown for depths below minus 200 meter. The Pacific has most of the lightest water with densities below 26.0, whereas the Atlantic has most of the densest water between 27.5 and 28.0. Antarctic bottom water is indeed densest for Pacific and Indian Oceans, but not for the Atlantic, which has a lot of similarly dense water. The density of ocean water varies. It becomes more dense as it becomes colder, right down to its freezing point of minus 1.9 degrees centigrade. The density of pure water is 1000 kilograms per meter cubed. Ocean water is more dense because of the salt in it. Density of ocean water at the sea surface is about 1027 kg per meter cubed. Conclusion. The composition of seawater is affected by many different chemical and physical transport mechanisms. The dissolved substances and particulates are regularly added to the oceans by rivers. The particulates may be transported by the wind to mid-ocean regions. Many chemical substances are also added to deep ocean waters by hydrothermal solutions. Seawater is a rich source of various commercially important chemical elements. Much of the world's magnesium is recovered from seawater. In certain parts of the world, sodium chloride, table salt, is still obtained by evaporating seawater. The waters of the seas and oceans have formed over millions of years. Most people do not realize the complex nature of seawater. In fact, the seawater cannot be easily duplicated in any lab in any manner in the world. The chemical composition and ratios of the minerals and naturally occurring elements of seawater are too complex to accurately replicate.